Disaster at Christmas. Pan Am 103 never makes it home.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. The simple facts are these. Pan Am's Flight 103 had been in the air for an hour. The 747 was en route from London to New York and then Detroit. According to Pan American, there were more than 240 passengers on board and a crew of 15. It was after dark. For reasons we do not yet understand, the plane, with 50,000 gallons of fuel on board, plunged into a small Scottish market town. Pan American is not aware that any of the passengers or crew has survived. Our first report is from ABC's Barry Dunsmore.
The first pictures from the scene show strings of houses on fire. Eyewitnesses say the plane hit a gas station and several houses. Others talked of a rumbling and then a terrible explosion.
Dozens of houses are burning, and the fire brigade are being hampered in their attempts to put out the fires by the risk of a further explosion from the petrol station, which the Pan Am Jumbo hit as it crashed into the town.
Rescue services have taken a dozen people to an area hospital. They are believed to be local people suffering from burns. There is no word, but little hope for the passengers.
There's very little hope, I would have thought, for anybody who was in that plane. When it did come to Earth, as people have described locally, with an enormous flash of flame, it hit very hard.
Pan Am Flight 103 originated in Frankfurt, West Germany. There was a plane change to the 747 in London. 54 minutes after the plane took off, flying at 31,000 feet, it disappeared from radar screens in Scotland. Shortly after, it was seen crashing into the Scottish town of Lockerbie, near Scotland's border with England. In New York, a Pan Am spokesman said there was no contact with the aircraft before it crashed.
As I said, there was no prior indication that there were any problems with the aircraft. There was no contact prior, any Mayday signals. The aircraft had made normal contact with the control center.
More than a dozen rescue helicopters have been dispatched to the area, while the main highway between Scotland and England has been closed. The town center of Lockerbie is littered with debris. And it's also understood that the cockpit of the plane hit another town about 6 miles away. This may account for the fact that some people think there were two planes and two explosions. However, the RAF has ruled out any military plane, and it doesn't seem likely a civilian plane would have been that high. An official of Jane's All the World's Aircraft has told us tonight that given the spread of the debris, it certainly seems as though there was an implosion, which would have been caused by a structural failure, or an explosion caused perhaps by a bomb. Peter?
Okay, Barry Dunsmore in London, thanks very much. There is as yet no indication, as you've heard there, that the pilot of the 747 alerted ground controllers there was any emergency, even though one eyewitness said, seen from the ground, it was like a rain of fire. In the cold world of the radar screen, Flight 103 was suddenly just no longer a blip. If the particular suddenness with which this happened is a clue, the experts have not said so yet. ABC's Jim Slade has a report.
On a normal course, a 747 leaving Heathrow for New York would have climbed to 30,000 feet or above by the time Flight 103 disappeared from radar scopes. It would also have been very heavily fueled. Boeing Commercial Aircraft in Seattle say this particular plane was the 15th 747 off their assembly line in 1970, was delivered to Pan Am in February of that year. However, this plane was structurally reinforced for possible military service. Since it was scheduled to cross the Atlantic tonight, it was probably fueled to or near capacity. That means it was still heavily fueled at the time of the crash, adding to the explosion. British authorities say the plane's crew made no comment on the radio, indicating whatever happened took place suddenly without warning. Military authorities there indicate there's no suggestion of another plane in the vicinity, seemingly ruling out a mid-air collision, but that's being investigated. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, which investigates all accidents involving American aircraft, is sending one man tonight and will send a full team of experts as needed. Boeing's getting up its own team. The FAA is sending people, and the FBI is waiting for developments that might indicate sabotage before sending anyone. All in all, the 747 has a good track record. Most of the accidents involving them have had external causes. 2 747s were destroyed in a runway collision in the Canary Islands. A Japan Airlines 747 crashed when a cracked bulkhead gave way from damage on takeoff. Tonight, the puzzle is what happened at 31,000 feet over Scotland. Peter?
Jim, it's my own experience that there's enormous speculation at the time of air crashes, and reporters almost invariably turn out to be wrong.
You're absolutely correct. There is no way at this point to guess what happened aboard that aircraft. And every time you try to decide from the looks of the thing what happened, you find out in the conclusion of the investigation you were wrong.
Okay, Jim Slade in Washington, thanks very much. Just to reaffirm that Pan Am said just a short while ago that as far as it's aware, there were no survivors on board the aircraft. We have been told from a variety of sources that among the people on board were a number of Syracuse University students who were returning from London, where Syracuse University has an overseas program, that the United Nations Commissioner for Namibia, formerly Southwest Africa, Bernd Carlson, was also reportedly on the plane. And there have been a number of unconfirmed reports, and I emphasize unconfirmed here, that also on board were a number of U.S. servicemen who were coming back from overseas for Christmas.
This is World News Tonight.
This is a special Flight 103 memorial edition of this program. You just heard a clip from ABC News on the evening of December 21st, 1988, when many Americans learned the tragic news. Earlier that day, at 7:02 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, a Pan Am Boeing 747 named Clipper Maid of the Seas, with 259 souls on board en route to New York, suffered a catastrophic in-flight breakup and crashed into the Scottish town of Lockerbie, killing all passengers and crew and 11 on the ground. Later in the program, we will be joined by John Reina, the brother of Pan Am flight attendant Jocelyn Reina, who was killed on Flight 103. Joining John are Linda Freire and Myron Rosenstein, both Pan Am employees based at JFK, who were sent to England and Scotland on special assignments after the crash. But first, here's a news clip from BBC Newsnight the day after the disaster on December 22nd, 1988.
Good evening. Two hellish nightmares coming together in one terrible reality. That is the story of the Lockerbie disaster, of how death and destruction in the sky brought death and devastation on the ground below. In this special edition on the crash of Pan Am Flight 103, which has almost certainly cost the lives of more than 270 people, we examine the growing conviction that terrorist sabotage was the cause of the disaster. We'll also be considering the startling possibility that warnings of a bomb attack on Pan Am were given but not fully acted upon. On both sides of the Atlantic tonight, people are still coming to terms with the scale of the Lockerbie air crash. When Pan Am Flight 103 from Frankfurt to New York via London broke up and fell out of the sky yesterday evening, it was Britain's worst air disaster. None of the 259 people on board, most of them Americans, survived, and at least 17 people are feared to have lost their lives on the ground, as flaming wreckage ploughed into the small border town of Lockerbie. The jumbo jet, which had been airborne for less than an hour after taking off from Heathrow, scattered debris over a wide area to the east of the town. The cockpit of the aircraft fell in open country 3 miles away. But Lockerbie itself took the full force of the crash, as a section of the plane gouged a 30-foot crater through a row of houses. Nearby, the busy A74 dual carriageway was engulfed by a fireball. It's still not clear how many people died in their cars there. Tonight, with the search for more bodies suspended until the morning, questions about the disaster are concentrated on the cause of the crash. And there is now very strong speculation that a terrorist bomb caused the plane to disintegrate in mid-air. It has even emerged that American embassies in Europe were warned on Tuesday last week about a possible bomb attack on a Pan Am flight from Frankfurt to the United States. The public were apparently not informed of any threat. We'll be looking at these points in detail a little later, but first, Gavin Esther reports from the scene of last night's crash.
Tonight, here in Lockerbie, the town is settling down as best it can to a tragedy which has destroyed Christmas for the community. Local people say they can hardly find the words to express their grief at a catastrophe many of them actually witnessed. Like an earthquake, said one. The sky seemed to be raining fire, said another. The day none of us will ever forget.
Didn't know what it was, and then we rushed outside and just all this debris coming down.
It came straight down, and then this great mass of flames, and I turned to run, but there's nowhere to run to.
It looked like a scene out of hell. This whole road was ablaze.
For their part, throughout the day, the emergency services had continued the task of making sense of the wreckage and recovering the bodies. But at dusk tonight, the 600-member specialist teams began to scale down their activities, waiting until first light tomorrow to resume again in force. The day had begun with search teams concentrating on 6 separate locations in and near Lockerbie, where most of the wreckage and bodies have been discovered. American officials and FBI agents assisting British accident investigators from the Department of Transport. On the hillsides outside the town, the wreckage was spread across fields, though the battered Pan Am cockpit remained recognizable. Both black box flight recorders, with their vital clues as to what went wrong, were quickly found, though the complex analysis of data could take weeks. The fact that the debris was spread so far and wide apparently confirmed the belief that the aircraft somehow blew apart at 31,000 feet and at a speed of over 500 miles an hour. The Sherwood Park estate, the worst-hit area, was cordoned off. 8 homes were severely damaged, almost to destruction, said the police. 13 adults and 4 children in the area are missing. Police said there is grave concern for their safety. A mains water pipe was cut, gas supplies were cut off, many telephones reported not working, a town picking up the pieces when it should have been preparing for Christmas. There were those who tried to bring comfort to the bereaved and to display the nation's grief. Then the Prime Minister and Scottish Secretary Malcolm Rifkin spent several hours seeing the sites of worst damage. Mrs. Thatcher told local people of her sorrow.
Well, there are quite a lot of broken windows,
yes,
and the gardens are full
of big bit of the engine right in there.
Then, of course, there were the cars on the road as well.
Yes.
It was a terrible. I think the worst accident we've had.
Yes.
Clearly moved, the Prime Minister spoke of the scenes at the crash sites.
It is even worse in daylight than it looked on television at night. Now you can see the full enormity of the damage and the extent of it. And the way in which there's pieces of aircraft and twisted metal scattered over a wide area, and the number of houses that are damaged. And the people in them must have wondered just whatever was happening, as indeed the people in the aircraft must have had this, well, it was just terrible.
Tonight in Lockerbie, the police continued planning for the resumed search tomorrow. Local people checked the list of survivors posted at the town hall. The town hall itself has become a morgue for the bodies coming down from the hillsides. Of course, the people of Lockerbie are not alone in their grief. They'll soon be joined by the relatives of those killed on the plane itself, flying in from America. And when that happens, the identification of the bodies will begin.
And we'll have more from Gavin in Lockerbie before the end of the programme. As the Dumfriesshire town continues to absorb the scale of last night's disaster, across the Atlantic, friends and relations of American passengers on Flight 103 are beginning to mourn their dead too. But amid the grief, there is much debate in America over a specific warning of terrorist action against Pan Am flights from Europe. A warning which came in the form of a telephone call to the American embassy in Helsinki. That warning was circulated some days later to American embassies and airlines and to the British government in London. And a similar warning came from the Israeli security service Mossad. So tonight, in view of these various warnings, Americans are asking why their public wasn't told as well. From Washington, Martin Bell reports.
38 of the victims were students coming home to Syracuse University in New York State. They didn't get there. The university mourns them.
Let us embrace with a handshake, with a hug, reach out, embrace.
They shared their grief at the university, a grief felt far beyond Syracuse. The United Nations was mourning, and so was the United States. But it was also questioning. And the questions that State Department spokeswoman Phyllis Oakley had to deal with centered on the advance warning the Americans received of just such an attack as may have happened last night.
I can also confirm that on December 5, 1988, an unidentified individual telephoned the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki and stated that sometime within the next 2 weeks there would be a bombing attempt against a Pan American aircraft flying from Frankfurt to the U.S.
The action included a notice actually posted at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow warning of the possible danger of flying Pan Am through Frankfurt and suggesting that embassy staff might like to go home another way. That provoked a storm of protest. If U.S. officials knew of the peril, why didn't the general public?
Sometimes by going public, you give undue attention to what the terrorist wants to call attention to. And so often it's best to handle these matters by aborting the threat. But if you want me to say that if we have specific information that a specific flight was going to be specifically targeted and that information had any credibility to it, then I think widespread notices should be given and people should well know that they were putting their lives at risk.
The last voice you heard was Vice President and President-elect George H.W. Bush. The FAA sent the security bulletin in question to the Pan Am Frankfurt station. The airline's operation headquarters in New York was not notified. The teletype did not come through an emergency channel and went overlooked only to be discovered the day after the disaster. There is no known evidence there was any direct communication with the airline from U.S. government officials, law enforcement, or intelligence representatives on this security issue. 2 days after the American public were shocked by the horror of Lockerbie, President Ronald Reagan gave a statement on December 23, 1988, from the South Lawn of the White House as he and First Lady Nancy Reagan were departing for California.
I have a little statement here as Nancy and I depart from California, or for California, to spend the holiday season with family and friends. I want to express our sorrow and our concern for the families and friends of those who died in the crash of the Pan American Flight 103. There are many difficult aspects to this tragedy, but none so compelling as the anguish of those families who will not have their loved ones with them this Christmas season. Christmas is a special time for the young, for those who carry the twin promises of hopes and dreams. And on this flight were the hopes and dreams of many young people, including the tragic loss of so many students from Syracuse University. A tragedy that steals the hopes and dreams from our society magnifies the loss to our society. I know that America and the world mourn the loss of these wonderful people. And I ask that all of our citizens say a special prayer this Christmas for those who have felt the pain of those losses. May God be with them. Well, none of this, Helen, is established. The search still goes on. We have no knowledge of how this accident happened. We're trying to find out.
Mr. President, do you feel that the American citizens should have been warned about a possible incident as American diplomats were?
I think all the precautions that could be taken were taken with regard to warning the airline and all, but if you stop to think about it, such a public statement with nothing more to go on than an anonymous telephone call, you'd literally have closed down the air traffic in the world.
Mr. Reagan, the suggestion, though, is that you care more about the diplomats who you did warn than the American public.
No, that, as I say, I think that would have been a virtually impossible thing to do on the basis of that telephone call. And then when, if ever, would there be a revival on all airlines? No, we do not know that just yet. I've got to go.
Do you accept the apology of the Iranians, not the apology, but the statement from the Iranians that they regret what happened, that they had nothing to do with it? Wants us to accept the Iranian statement that they had nothing to do with it.
I think we're going to try to find out by substantial evidence who had anything to do with it.
Before we begin our special interview, I would like to make an editorial comment to you, our listeners. It is important for all of us to remember that each of the 270 victims of the Lockerbie tragedy have their own personal stories, and their families deserve our condolences and respect. The events on December 21st, 1988, changed the lives of the victims' families and friends forever. It is a good time for all of us to take a moment and remember what we are grateful for, hold those special to us close, and remember to cherish every moment because we do not know what tomorrow holds. Take a moment and call an old friend or a lonely neighbor. Send someone you're thinking about an old-fashioned card in the mail. Smile at someone on the street. Sometimes it's the little things that mean the most to people. Much like that fateful December day in 1988, our lives can change in an instant. 16-year-old Melina Hudson was among the 259 people on board Flight 103. Among Melina's possessions recovered was a notebook containing a message that I would like to share with you. Here's what Melina wrote in that notebook. No one dies unless they are forgotten. Let us remember all those who lost their lives in the skies over Lockerbie and on the ground. For this episode, we are joined by John Reina, the brother of Pan Am flight attendant Jocelyn Reina, who died in the tragedy. Also joining us is Linda Freire and Myron Rosenstein, who is affectionately known as Rosie. Both are Pan Am veterans and went to Lockerbie on special assignment to help the families of victims and assist in the investigation. Thank you for joining us for this Remembrance episode. Thank you, John, Linda, and Rosie. John, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your sister, Jocelyn?
My sister was what we called in the family the miracle baby. My mother had 5 miscarriages before she carried my sister to term. So when she was finally born, it was quite a big deal in our family. We come from a very large Italian French immigrant family. My dad had 4 brothers. My mother had 13 brothers and sisters, so we have a very large family, and family was very important to us. Although my sister and I were the only 2 children my parents had, we were surrounded by a great number of cousins and relatives our age. So we grew up in a large, extended, very close family unit. Trying to get this out. When I turned about 12 years old, which would make my sister approximately 4 or 5, I got a reel-to-reel tape recorder for my birthday, a small one. It was kind of the thing that was happening at that time. And when she had her birthday, which was in May, right after mine in March, I interviewed her, kind of, and asked her about her birthday, asked her about her gifts, and that kind of thing. And then I asked her, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said, I want to be a stewardess for Pan Am. It kind of gives us chills today to hear that. That was, at that time, they were called stewardesses. And we didn't discover this tape until several years after the tragedy, after her death. And we were going through some things and we saw this tape and saw her birthday date on it and played it. And we probably had 5 or 6 family members in the room at the time. And everybody just went silent. It was one of those hair-raising experiences where you're like, she was 4 years old. And, was this some kind of, foretelling or what? We don't know to this day. But it was very emotional to hear this and hear this on the tape. And we played it back a couple times to make sure we heard what we thought we were hearing. And indeed, that's what she said. I want to be a stewardess when I grow up for Pan Am. In her high school years, she studied drama. She was really into the Shakespearean acting and stuff. She took several years of French, which helped her later when she got hired for Pan Am. And she was also very involved in the Shakespearean theater at Santa Monica College and at Cypress College in Orange County, California. She worked her way up in the Renaissance Fair. They don't just let you walk in and say, I want to be the Queen of England, or I want to be this, or I want to be that. You have to work your way up. And she started as what they called a cut purse, a street fair person working, where she pretends to be a pickpocket and stuff. And eventually worked her ways up to starring roles in their Shakespearean productions. So we went quite a bit to the Renaissance Fair to see her. And I'll share one funny occasion that happened on there. When she was doing Romeo and Juliet on stage at the Renaissance Fair, her Romeo came on stage drunk. Couldn't remember his lines, stumbling all over the place. Really kind of hysterical, and people didn't know quite what to make of it. But Joss was so dynamic in her reactions to this that she played the whole 30-minute show as if it was intended to be a comedy. At one point, she actually climbed down the trellis from her balcony and got up behind Romeo and put her hands under his bottom, pushed him up the trellis so that he was now at her balcony. Then she ran around backstage, climbed back into the balcony, and adjusted her hair and adjusted her dress. And when she resumed her position on the balcony, she asked, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore is the Chianti, Romeo? Too much vino doth make both of thy heads droop. And the entire crowd went crazy, jumping up and down, cheering, clapping, and everything. This guy is swaying on the trellis. She has to reach out and grab him and keep him from falling off the trellis, and they closed the curtains. So every time we would hear that line, Romeo, Romeo, we would joke about where's the Chianti. We had a lot of good times like that together. We also, being practicing Catholics at the time, practiced the Meatless Fridays regimen with our religion. And so that meant pizza on Friday nights. Well, when I got to be in high school and college, it kind of got to be a thing between us that we would vie and jostle each other for the leftover pizza for breakfast the next morning. So what she would do is take the pizza box and take the pizza that was left inside and write a note on top of the pizza box saying, John, this is my pizza, don't eat my pizza. Well, I would get up the next morning, see the pizza box in there, take the pizza box out, I would eat the pizza, and on the back of her note, I would write, Kim, because her given name was Kimberly Reina, Kim, didn't see your note, so I ate your pizza. So she would come and try to come up with different ways to hide her pizza so that she could have it for breakfast on Saturday mornings.
How do you tell your children about their Aunt Jocelyn?
Wow. I have 6. I had 2 at the time that the tragedy happened. I had 3. One was 8, and the others were 4 and 5. So when the tragedy happened, we were preparing for Christmas at that time for 3 children that naturally look forward to the holidays and everything that comes with it. Also being a large family, we had a lot of people coming in to my parents' home because this was going to be a special occasion. She was coming home for Christmas. When the tragedy happened, everybody didn't know what to do. My parents, Pan Am graciously offered the next morning to fly anybody in family who wanted to go to London where they were gathering. And my parents agreed to go, so I was kind of left in charge of the family. And everybody was kind of in a quandary. What do we do? What do we do? You turn on TV, and that's all you saw for that whole weekend was just the coverage of this. And we kind of had a family meeting, and everybody was wondering what to do. And I said, look, we are not going to cancel Christmas, and we're not going to not observe Christ's birthday because of Kim's death. Christ's birth will still be celebrated even though Kim's gone. And so we have moved on from that particular situation, and I think because we did celebrate it and we did move forward with the children, we were able to kind of get through this horrible situation in a fairly positive way for the children.
Linda, would you like to walk us through December 21st, 1988?
Yeah, sure. It started off the day as any other normal day would. Morning briefings at the airport. I was at JFK, and just happened to be standing outside one of the manager's office. We were just chatting, and all of a sudden, her phone rings, and she goes over to sit down and answer her phone, and she just looked up at me, and I could tell the look on her face. Something was very, very wrong, and she kind of looked down, and then she looked up, and she said, the 103 is off radar. And you instinctively knew, obviously, that wasn't a good thing and that something was very wrong. That's when everybody started jumping into action. We're pulling up crew lists. We're trying to get more information out of operations as to what had happened, what was going on, how much did we know, how much information did we have. First thing we found out, obviously, was that the crew was based in London, because at that point, the 103 had been staffed, depending on the month, either a New York crew or a London-based crew. So then the staff was kind of called in, and we were assigned different responsibilities. And on that day, I was told to go over to the terminal, over to the Worldport, Pan Am Worldport, and then to assist with maybe family members for those who were coming in to, who had heard about it, any crew member, family members that might be coming to the airport. I was asked to contact, be available at the operations center at JFK and speak to anybody. And I spent pretty much the rest of the day there, and unfortunately did encounter many of the families, not necessarily the crew member families, but the families of many of the victims from the students of Syracuse University. And in particular, one woman who was kind of caught unawares of this, what had happened, and only saw it when she came into the terminal and collapsed in front of the podium when the news was all over the monitors in the terminal. And it was a heartbreaking, heart-wrenching situation because we were starting to get information, but the televisions in the terminal were obviously carrying it and reporting from Lockerbie with images. And so it was very difficult. I spent the rest of that day, that night, just assisting before going home. And then the next day, being told that I was going to be sent to England to assist with the operations at the local base there. The London base was a very small base. It was a very tight-knit base. People, because of its small size, everybody knew everybody. They were friends. They were family. The base operations was a small staff as well, and they were devastated. This just rocked them to their core to have as many of their friends and colleagues gone in an instant, who they had just seen not an hour and a half, before the flight left. And I spent the next month and a half, almost 2 months, in London, going back and forth on occasion to Lockerbie. My main assignment was really being a liaison with the families of the French-speaking flight attendants, and just really listening and talking to them, assisting them with any arrangements that they needed if they were coming over and they wanted to go to Lockerbie. I was kind of their personal attaché, if you will. And Pan Am arranged that with each of the family members, not only for the crew members, but for passengers as well. Each family was assigned a Pan Am person to be their personal attaché, escort, their liaison, to help with any kind of arrangements. Anything that they needed, we were there to assist them day or night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for as long as they needed or wanted us with them. I was also basically manning the London base operations and assisting with flight departures and arrivals, and really talking to the crew base there and incoming crew members from the other bases who then became aware, and as they flew in and out of London. It was an incredibly difficult time. People were just so devastated and shaken to their core, but still wanting to do the best they could for Pan Am and carry on. We had flights rate, and people had to go out and do their jobs and get back on the plane. So it was emotional. It was tough.
Rosie, would you like to share your perspective on what transpired on December 21st?
Yes, it was a normal day, the 21st, reported to the hangar. My function at the hangar was basically aircraft maintenance and logistics. And of course, the logistics portion, I would get involved with the 103 when it arrived at the gate, and if it was going to be a hangar turnaround eventually on a B check overnight, and whatever was required for the aircraft at the time of arrival, they would taxi the aircraft down to the hangar. So what happened that day was I always got telexes, whatever was required in my office, and I seen a blurb about the 103 missing. And as the day grew a few more hours later, then I knew about Lockerbie. And I received a phone call since I headed up the management association. Can I muster some people up to go to the Worldport and try to assist with the passenger relatives arriving? So I did that, and I was there until approximately 3 a.m. in the morning, and it was quite an ordeal. It was mind-boggling. I recall that woman collapsing, and I went over and with several other people, we picked her up, and of course, I think the Times or somebody had that on CNN News, if I recall. Anyway, I was scheduled the 22nd, the night of the 22nd, to go on vacation for Christmas holiday, and I was going to be back in January, right after New Year's. My wife worked for Pan Am. She was based in London for passenger service. So, of course, on my long weekends, I used to watch the loads and possibly go over there. And of course, on my vacations, I would go to London. We had a house right outside London Airport. And on the 22nd, System Control always knew, because it was always last minute things. They knew the folks that were going to ride to London or Frankfurt and whatnot. And they contacted me and said, "You're going on vacation over there, Rosie. Can you devote some time?" And I says, "Absolutely." They says, "Well, when you arrive in London, we'll have all the information what we wish for you to do." So I arrived, of course, on the morning of the 23rd to find out that I was to report to John Jackson and John McGee, and I was going to be the liaison or the courier between London, Glasgow to Lockerbie. And they had arranged for me to ride British Midland up early in the morning to Glasgow and return late at night. And I did that for 5 weeks. I would get all the records. That most of it was medical records for identification purposes. Some of the records was from the FBI bomb data center. Instead of them having to send a federal guy, they assigned me to the function. And I also, after about it must have been 5-6 days, relatives started to come over to Lockerbie, and I assisted them, but they had people like Linda escorting them. I think that's it for the moment. I had a couple of incidents that became very, very nerve-wracking. We lost somebody by the name of John Mulroy. Remember Linda? John Mulroy was system director of communications, and he had a large family, and they lived in Comac. And John lost 2 children and himself on there, and I had known the family, but when they arrived in Lockerbie about a week later, my mind was a blank going up and coming back. That's all I did. and I was exhausted, and of course I didn't recognize them. And they came over to me and broke down, and they broke me down at the time. That's about it for the moment. Terrible ordeal. I've seen things that nobody should have seen.
Yeah.
John, is there anything you'd like to share with us about that day, December 21st?
For us in the families, it pretty much started like any other day. We did have the anticipation that Jocelyn was coming home. The way we found out, I had an employee and one of my managers come into my office and say that a Pan Am flight had crashed upon, at that point they said that it was leaving Heathrow Airport. And so automatically you start thinking, oh my God, is it possible? Could she be on that plane? About a half an hour later, another employee came in and said, John, you don't have to worry. The plane left out of Frankfurt. And I said, oh, okay. And about that time, my dad called. My dad worked for Pacific Telephone in the switching office, and they're able to monitor a lot of the TV programs and stuff that are going on for news, because that impacts the number of call volumes happening. And when he heard the news, he knew that the plane, Flight 103, originated in Frankfurt, discharged passengers in London, picked up other passengers in London, and then moved on to New York. So he got permission to call long distance and call her roommates, who were also flight attendants, and ask if she was on the plane, and got confirmation that she was. So we got confirmation in the late afternoon, California time, way before a lot of other people knew about it. So my father told me to immediately go get to the house. That's where our family always gathered when there was something important or it was something, a holiday or whatever. He said, get to the house. And I did, and arrived to find my dad and mom. She worked for Hughes Aircraft. My dad worked for Pacific Telephone. And my mom was hysterical. She had passed out in her office, and they had to transport her to my dad's office, where upon being revived, she saw my father and passed out again. So he got her home, and my mother was in hysterics. My grandparents were there waiting for my sister's arrival. The house was pandemonium. I started calling family and friends to let them know that she was on the flight. And then we started calling Pan Am. Unfortunately, the lines had a recording on there. They weren't letting anybody get through. Not working for Pan Am, I don't quite understand. Maybe they were concerned with the call volume or whatever, but families didn't hear for hours and hours. By that time, we knew what the situation was. It was all over the news, early evening news, California time. And then we started getting calls from the news media, because it wasn't hard for them to find out that there was a California girl who was based in London who was on the flight, as well as I believe the pilot and co-pilot were also California people. So we got inundated by the news media before we really had any official answers at all. It wasn't until after 12 midnight California time, many hours later, that Pan Am called and said she was on the flight, which caused untold pain, because everybody's still hoping and praying that this isn't true, this isn't real. There was a sense of unreality about it. But when Pan Am called, it was confirmed. At that point, they offered to fly my parents to London the next morning to go to LAX, and they would fly them out. And we had probably the worst night I have ever experienced in my life. We would get one person calm down and another one would start. I held my grandmother as she cried hysterically for hours that evening until she fell asleep from exhaustion, and carried her into a spare bedroom and put her to bed. And my aunts and uncles who had come in, two of my aunts, were down, and spent the night back and forth between bedrooms, trying to console people and trying to make sense of this all. In the morning, I had to help my father get dressed. He was incapable of getting dressed. He was just in shock. My grandmother and my aunts helped my mother, We took them to LAX, where they were immediately greeted by Pan Am representatives who took them into a special lounge, and they flew out for London later that day. So, our experiences as a family someone on the plane and as well as a crew member were very, very traumatic. I don't think I can give you a sense of the horror and the shock and the pain that we went through that night. It was just like, will this night ever end? Please, God, don't let this be true. It can't be happening to us. All of those thoughts go through your head. And then we had the news media. And if I can comment on that a moment, I will. They were relentless. The night after the tragedy, my parents were in London, and I was pretty much managing the home front. Still had aunts and uncles and grandparents at my parents' home. They were incapable of going home. And our kitchen was flooded with these tremendous bright lights, and looked out the sliding glass doors, the patio doors, and there was a camera crew setting up a light pole, and they were climbing over my father's back wall of his fence to get shots of us inside the house. They sent a reporter to the door who wanted a story, and I told him that I have no story for you at this time. They haven't recovered her body, and there are people inside who are not going to believe that this happened until they've actually recovered her body or we get more word from Pan Am. And they were pretty relentless. So my best friend and a cousin actually took this reporter who refused to leave our living room once I opened the front door, took him under their arms and walked him out the front door and tossed him out. And told the news crews, there's nothing here. Not right now. And that continued off and on for about a week. Everywhere you went, there was coverage. The picture of the nose of the plane that crashed in the field opposite Tundergarth Church was everywhere. And we even saw it on the cover of, I think it was Time magazine later that week on the cover. And you couldn't get away from it. You could not get away from this story. It was like I said, it was a night of horrors and a week of a nightmare that just didn't seem to end. From my father, who was calling constantly from London, where him and my mother were at in the hotel, he had nothing but good to say about the people with Pan Am that were doing everything to everything to help them through this time. And
many strange things took place.
Yes. Yeah,
where the wing touched down in Lockerbie, in the center was a fireplace, and it was there, like not touched. Everything around it was totally destroyed, including the gas station.
Yeah.
And this total fireplace was intact. True story.
Yeah.
I saw a bottle of champagne in front of someone's home there, wrapped down 4 feet, unbroken, in the ice bucket. And you can go on and on.
Yeah. We saw pictures. The news media wasn't real careful about editing some of the stuff out that they were providing at first. We saw some of those horrors back home.
It was awful.
Bodies that were found, different things. So because of that, then we had the added fear and horror and concern and worry of what was Joss going to look like, what was going to be that situation. And Pan Am called on New Year's Day and said that they had finally identified her and made arrangements for us to go and bring her home. So we contacted a mortuary who sent a casket to the airport, and Pan Am arranged a a huge wooden crate to be delivered to her flat, and we brought her home. And she had her bedroom was in the upstairs above the flat, and I went upstairs to her room. My father couldn't do it. My mother didn't make the flight. She couldn't go. So I went with my dad, and he got to the house and couldn't go upstairs. So I went up to her bedroom and packed all of her things, brought them down to this crate to be shipped home to us. And God bless them, her roommates, the other flight attendants, had left her room the way she left it when she left for Heathrow. And the first thing that I saw when I opened her bedroom door was the imprint of where she had rolled out of bed and had sat there for a moment. And in the carpet, you can see where her two slippers had been when she slipped her feet into the slippers. And I had to pack up everything of hers and bring it home. So that was really very tough. A couple things that got us through that period when we were there for about a week was, first of all, the Pan Am people who, like Linda said, we had a lady assigned to us. She was, I think, based out of Miami. I'm not sure. A wonderful flight attendant supervisor, a woman, and I wish I remembered her name to give her credit.
Rosemary Smart.
Rosemary. Wonderful woman. Really took good care of us. Really was sympathetic and understanding, and I can't say enough about her. Fantastic, fantastic person. And then the World Wings people in London. They showed up and wanted to know if they could take us out to dinner. They took my dad out to a really nice restaurant and presented my father with a silver picture frame with their emblem embossed on the frame. And just really were there for us and for my family. And I can't thank the the people at Pan Am and the World Wings people for everything they did. Their compassion and understanding and sympathy was truly, you could tell it was heartfelt. You could tell that they really meant it. This wasn't a let's CYA because this thing has happened and we're afraid of what's going to happen down the road. They really didn't care about that. All they cared about was all those families that were there gathered in that hotel. And you could go down the hall and you could hear women crying and wailing at all hours of the night. Like I said, it was, and then you would see the Pan Am people going and knocking on doors and offering comfort and solace.
The families of Lockerbie couldn't give you enough comfort. Even till this day, if they find out that you're from Pan American, which I went to the 30th anniversary, the people there never forget you.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the things that I remember most is spending hours just listening to people who wanted to talk about their family members, their children, their spouses, their parents that were crew members on the flight. And there were very little things you could say to them to make a difference, but you could listen. And it was, we hoped it was helpful. We hoped that at least having some contact with somebody to whom they could talk at all hours of the night or day, it didn't matter. Most of these calls I got were, or going to visit somebody in a hotel room, were at 12 midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's when they were alone with their thoughts. And that's when maybe they needed the outreach and the listening, maybe more. And I, for one, was more than happy to be able to be there to provide any level of comfort, no matter how small or insignificant. And I don't know that we did anything great. We just did what we knew we had to do, and that was in our heart, because we hurt too.
The word was dignity. Everything was done with great dignity, like all folks. And
that was, and Rosie, you know this too, that was something that was always inbred in us at Pan Am.
That's
You
correct.
treat people with dignity and respect and the utmost professionalism at all times, no matter what the circumstances. This was just a matter of trying to reach out and help somebody, if you could, in any way you could. And if we made a difference, a small difference, then we did our job.
Absolutely.
We did what we were supposed to do.
Seeing the Pan Am people in their uniforms at the church service that was in London.
At the memorial.
The memorial. The captains and flight crew with those famous white hats. And just as we walked out, they were all hugging us and everything like we were family. And
we were.
You were. My sister always said that.
Till this day, we're family.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. Yeah, my sister said that she had found a second family. If it was possible to find another family after a super large extended Italian family, she'd found another one in Pan Am and she'd found a home. And she was so looking forward to getting her gold wings. She still had the silver ones and said, I can't wait till I get the gold ones. Was a big was going to be a big thing for her. The people of Lockerbie were amazing. We went to another a function about 2 months later, and the women of Lockerbie, as they were bringing in all of these artifacts and clothes and everything that was found scattered for hundreds of miles. These women were washing and ironing and folding and putting these clothes out. And when you went to
That's right.
the gymnasium of that, I think it was a local school.
The ice skating rink was busy.
Yes, that's it. And the long tables with all of these artifacts, and I mean, even the smallest things, little rings and stuff that, and if you identified something as from your loved one, they were more than happy to make sure you got it. The Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary were amazing. My father and I helped form a group, the Families of Pan Am 103, and we were kept informed by them and made some good friends with some of those constables and their leader, Tom McCullough. The FBI that was working with them, amazing guys. They were not.
Margaret Thatcher communicated with the control center every evening.
Yeah, they were not going to let this go, and
the Queen Elizabeth had a representative there.
Yeah. So when you talk about the people of Lockerbie, they were amazing. I went into a little store to pick up some trinkets, something to bring home to my kids, and I had a pin on my jacket that our organization had made. It showed the outline of Scotland and it said Pan Am 103 on it. And the lady behind the counter said, "Did you know somebody on the flight?" And I said, "Yes, my sister was a flight attendant." And she said, "You're not paying for anything here." And I said, "No, we can't do that because there will be people out there who will take advantage of that, and if not take advantage of it, then will not understand or misconstrue your intentions. But I can't do it." And she said, I feel your pain. There's a memorial in the middle of Lockerbie to the soldiers of Lockerbie who were killed in the war. And she said, "I've got 2 brothers on that memorial. I know how you feel." Incredible people, incredible.
And I think one thing that's interesting all these many years later is the people of Lockerbie, they don't forget.
Never. They teach the children.
Yes,
the
they do.
history of Lockerbie.
They do, and the British media, the UK media, for whatever you want to say of them on a broader scope, they still remember and commemorate the event.
Right.
And John, to further a little bit more about the American media, we don't see that kind of attention and remembrance and commemorating of the people that were lost by the American media. And I wish that were so. I wish the intensity of their coverage and attention to everything that happened back in 1988 we're still focused on this so that people are remembered.
Yeah.
People like Jocelyn, people like those
Yep.
amazing people that were from the University of Syracuse that were on the flight, and all the other passengers, people who were on the ground, who just living, going to sleep at night or whatever they were doing, who were tragically lost when the plane hit. We want to remember these people. If there's nothing else that we can do at this point, let's not forget them. Let's always remember them and cherish their memories.
Absolutely. Tom, I rode that aircraft 5 weeks to the day prior back to New York on 103 Jump Sea Road. So I was in Lockerbie, in London 5 weeks prior on a few days holiday. And then, of course, the next time I went up was on the 23rd of December.
Yeah. My parents were visiting my sister about a week and a half before the tragedy, and they flew that flight home, ironically. So many ironies to this whole thing. And while we touch on the media a little bit, let me say something from the family's perspective. We, and especially those of us, there's not a bunch of us, but there are some in California, and what we get every December 21st, without fail, is we get the picture of the nose of the plane.
Yes.
We get the commentary, we get the talk. My family gets requests for interviews constantly. We for the most part, turn them down only because we've said everything we have to say about that situation. This podcast is different. This is a different, more heartfelt situation that's meant for posterity and meant to show a little bit more of the humanity side of it. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that picture of the nose of the plane in that field across the street from Tendergarth Church, we the families see that as pictures of a crime scene, because it was, and it is terribly painful to continually see that every year around December 21st.
Very painful, John. I
is.
arrived there and they hadn't removed the crew the morning I arrived.
We flew home with a gentleman that had been called by Pan Am and had flown over right after it happened and was one of the first people to go into the cockpit. And he was telling us on a flight home that he walked into the cockpit and looked around and turned to the law enforcement people there and said, "This is a bomb." Because the way that the explosion had happened, it had turned a lot of that cargo space area into literally shards of shrapnel. And they had gone right through the front of that plane and had penetrated the navigator, pilot, and co-pilot in their seats. The good news was when that happened, it killed him immediately. But he was telling us when we came home that he walked in and said, "This is a bomb." He knew it right away. Even before a lot of the media and a lot of other people picked up on it, he knew right away.
And I think to further also the constant reminder on the anniversary with a picture of the cockpit that we know and we've all said is incredibly painful to see, when there are other remembrances they could use to commemorate the event. The stained glass window in Lockerbie that represents all the different nations of the people who were passengers on the plane. Providing a list of the names, so it's not just the shards of a cockpit left in a field.
Right.
Doing something more meaningful and poignant than really seeing an image of that plane, that cockpit,
Right.
is would be so much better for the people who were affected and who are still suffering to this day.
Yeah, speaking for some of the families that I've spoken to, we would appreciate if well-wishers, members of even the Pan Am family. I'm on a lot of Pan Am Facebook sites, social media sites, and every year, well-meaning people put that picture up and say, we remember. They try to be sympathetic, but what they don't understand and what I'd like to reach out and tell them at this, This to us is a photo of a crime scene. And we relive it every time we see that picture. I don't know if you want to go so far as to call it PTSD or what you want to call it, but the family members seeing that every year, it is a very painful image. And like Linda said, I could, if you weren't so far away, I'd hug you right now, Linda, because what you just said about so many other images that would mean so much to the families could be put up there. Please don't put that up anymore with the front nose of the plane. We've seen it for 30 odd years now, and there are memories that triggers that's painful. My two youngest that were, I think, 5 and 6 at the time, now they're adults and they see that and they go, "Oh my God, don't show Dad." I hear them from the other room when they're watching TV or somebody put it in a newspaper or somebody put it on social media, and it tears us up. It's a pain
it's gut wrenching.
Yes, and the way that I can best describe the pain is it's like a bee sting. It's very painful and everything when it first happens, and then the sting goes away, but the memory and of what that was like, it doesn't.
It's like a gut punch again that you felt that day.
Yeah,
that somebody just took the breath out of your body.
Right.
And everything stopped in that moment.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that has to be used over and over again, why we can't move on and provide a beautiful commemorative image of the lives lost.
Yeah.
33 years ago, Flight 103 tragedy happened. For each of you, how would you like history and our listeners to look back on this event? And what message do you have for our listeners and also people in the future that may listen to this discussion? John, why don't we start with you?
I think that the families of the Pan Am 103 people would like this to be remembered as a terrible tragedy, but also as a terrorist act that was performed against Americans. It was designed to be that way. Probably the first terrorist attack directed at Americans or an American carrier. But second of all, that these were people looking at the book of Remembrance that I think the World Wings people did on the Wings of Angels. Every story, every person who died on that plane was special. They all have something special about them. Not just my sister, but if you read those every remembrance page, every one of those people had something special about them. It was like somebody picked a representative of the best of all of us across the entire spectrum of humanity and picked somebody to go. And these people should be remembered for the light in our lives that they gave us, for what they shared, that they were special people, and they left families behind that we'll never forget the tragedy, but we'll also never forget the heartfelt outpouring of grief and emotion and love that the Pan Am family gave to all of us during that time and still continues to do so. We don't ever want to forget that.
Rosie?
The world is a fragile place today. We better all get along. No one has the right to take another person's life from a political standpoint, and that's what this basically comes down to. It's a terrible situation. Actually, I'm lost for words because I am moved with this 103 situation. Thank you for the invite of this memorial.
Linda, any message?
As John has said, the families were so terribly impacted, but there is an extended family. And I just want to also make sure, and John has referenced it many times, and that includes the Pan Am family, because whether in life or in death, we are one. we were all severely affected and severely traumatized by this event, by this horrible terrorist act that in some ways was a precursor to things and events that came on later. And I would hope that the takeaway, no matter where you are in life, whether you work for an airline, whether you're in the military, whether you're in the government, that they study this and they really look and explore and understand what happened, because it so affected everybody around the world. People didn't want to fly. Certainly they didn't want to fly Pan Am after, but they didn't want to fly at all. And as a world, especially right now, we need to find solace and comfort in one another and try to wrap our arms around people and try to make it better for one another. And I would love to see the U.S. national media pay attention to this event in the United States and commemorate it with the dignity and respect that is deserved by the victims and their families.
John, any closing thoughts?
Yeah. First, I want to thank the museum and all of the Pan Am family, not only for this opportunity, but for everything they have done and said and been for us. We have never felt that that we were outsiders or that we were just casualties. We have always felt that this family, wrapped their arms around us collectively. When Pan Am ceased to function, we were upset. We felt horrible that this tragedy had extended to the point where it destroyed what we felt was the world's greatest airline. When my sister wanted to be a flight attendant, the only airline that she applied for was Pan Am. It was it. That was the epitome. That was the crown jewel of air transportation. And like I said, she was so proud that she was going to get her golden wings. And all I can say is thank you to everybody positively involved in all of this. Thank you to the Pan Am family for what you have said and done and always been there for us. And I hope that we have done a good job of representing to the rest of the world what the families felt and went through, and how they probably could not have gotten through as well as many of them did without you. And thank you.
And I would like to thank you, John, and Rosie and Linda. I know this was a very difficult topic, and I hope that you feel that with this program, we have... I'm at a loss for words as well.
I think we are able to commemorate the memories of the people lost, not just the tragedy of a terrorist attack, but commemorate and remember the people who were lost and what they had contributed during their lives.
Very well said.
Pan Am from 1927 to 1991 made commercial aviation what it is today, which is part of the American dream. And unfortunately, this history should never be lost, because they destroyed part of the American dream, which we made commercial aviation.
So thank you all for your time. We very much appreciate it. And we hope that our listeners hear what each of you have said and understand that this is to remember the victims of this tragedy. And I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you very much, John. I really appreciate you participating with us as all these many years later. And you are part of the Pan Am family. I mean, that will you and your family, that will never change. It's once you're a member of the family, it doesn't stop. It doesn't end. So I thank you. And
God
Rosie,
bless,
it's
Mr.
always
John. Nice to meet you.
You too,
it's always
Rosie.
a pleasure,
See you
Rosie, to
later.
have you. Take care. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. To conclude this special episode, the next 20 minutes will include clips from the 1998 10th Anniversary Remembrance and the 2005 Remembrance Ceremony, both held at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. First, you will hear opening remarks from 1998 by Jane Schultz, mother of Thomas, who died on Flight 103, followed by a prayer. This will then be followed by a 2005 clip of memorial bagpipes and the reading of the names of all of the 270 victims. Thank you for listening to this special Lockerbie Remembrance episode.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to welcome President Clinton, Mrs. Clinton, Lord Monroe, ambassadors, members of the Cabinet and the Congress, distinguished guests, friends from Scotland, the families of the victims and their friends. As we begin our 10th anniversary remembrance service, simultaneous services are being held at Syracuse University, Westminster Abbey, and Dryfesdale Parish Church in Lockerbie. Since the BBC is sending a live feed of this service throughout Scotland, I would like to take this opportunity to extend the warmest of greetings from all of us gathered here at Arlington National Cemetery to all of our friends in Lockerbie, many of whom traveled to Washington in 1995 to attend the dedication of the cairn. The original flight plan of the Maid of the Seas would have put Pan Am Flight 103 over the Irish Sea at 7:03 p.m. on December 21st, 1988. But because of unusually strong headwinds, the fate of 270 families was met in the sky over Lockerbie. Throughout the past 10 years, cherished friendships have sprung forth from the ashes of terrorism. The kindness, compassion, and understanding offered by so many Scots have been an invaluable gift in helping the 189 American families cope with such a devastating tragedy. You not only opened up your homes to us, you opened up your hearts. I would like to think that we Americans have been able to return the gift. A few years ago, a Lockerbie resident said to me over a cup of tea, "Jane, it is just so very sad that it took such a terrible tragedy for us Scots to realize just how special the Yanks are." We Yanks echo the same feelings for the Scots. In this special season of rebirth and new beginnings, may the kind people of Lockerbie return to life as it was before 7:03 p.m. on December 21st, 1988. God bless you all.
The prayer for today's ceremony was written by Richard Phillips, the Dean of Hendricks Chapel at Syracuse University, and it is being read at all four services. Please join me in prayer. O God of our histories, O God of our futures, we the people of the Lockerbie air disaster assemble today to share a service of commemoration on this 10th anniversary. We continue to mourn the loss of 270 lives, individuals torn from the temporal world by a terrorist bomb to join the eternal world far, far sooner than fullness of life would warrant. We did not, O God, need this event to know that we possess the gift of life but for a fleeting moment. We did not need this shock to understand the precious nature of our existences and our relationships to one another. Yet, despite the bitter pain of the loss of those precious souls, we come together to affirm the beauty of life and to express our profound gratitude for this amazing gift. Keep us, we pray, even in our most casual moments, keenly mindful of the lessons we have gathered unto our hearts and our minds as a result of this gigantic tragedy. Bless, O God, the souls lost. Bless the loved ones for whom the loss is most bitter. Bless us all as we continue to share the miracles of life and love. May we each know success as we strive in our multitude of actions to create a terrorless world. Amen.
We remember them. John Michael Gerard Ahern, Sarah Margaret Aker, John David Ackerstrom, Ronald Eli Alexander, Thomas Joseph Ammerman, Martin Louis Applebaum, Rachel Marie Azrelsky, Judith Ellen Atkinson, William Garretson Atkinson III, Elizabeth Nicole Evania, Jerry Don Averitt, Claire Louise Bacchiocci, Harry Michael Bainbridge, Stuart Murray Barclay, Jean Mary Bell, Julian McBain Bonello, Lawrence Ray Bennett, Philip Vernon Bergstrom, Alistair David Berkeley, Michael Stewart Bernstein, Stephen Russell Barrell, Noel Liddy Bertie, Surinder Mohan Bhatia, Kenneth John Bissett, Diane Ann Boatman Fuller, Stephen John Boland, Glenn John Buckley, Paula Marie Alderman Buckley, William Allen Daniels.
Nicole Elise Boulanger, Francis Boyer, Nicholas Bright, Daniel Solomon Browner, Colleen Renee Brunner, Timothy Guy Berman, Michael Warren Buser, Warren Max Buser, Stephen Lee Butler, William Martin Cadman, Fabiana Benvenuto di Caffarone, Hernan Luis Caffarone, Valerie Kennedy, Gregory Capasso, Timothy Michael Cardwell, Bernd Wilmar Carlson, Richard Anthony Cawley, Frank Chula, Theodora Eugenia Cohen, Eric Michael Coker, Jason Michael Coker, Gary Leonard Colasanti, Bridget Concannon, Thomas Concannon, Tracy Jane Corner, Scott Marsh Corey.
Willis Larry Kersey, Patricia Mary Coyle, John Benning Cummock, Joseph Patrick Curry, Gretchen Joyce Dater, Shannon Davis, Gabrielle Della Ripa, Joyce Christine DeMauro, Gianfranca DiNardo, Peter Thomas Stanley Dix, Dixit, Shanti Dixit, David Scott Dorenstein, Michael Joseph Doyle, Edgar Howard Eggleston III, Siv Ulla Egglestrom, Turhan Ergen, Charles Thomas Fisher IV, Joanne Flanagan, Kathleen Mary Flanagan, Thomas Brown Flanagan, Clayton Lee Flick, Arthur Fondler, Robert Gerard Fortune, Stacy Denise Franklin.
Paul Stephen Matthew Freeman, James Ralph Fuller, Ebolia Gabor, Amy Beth Gallagher, Matthew Kevin Gannon, Kenneth Raymond Garzinski, Paul Isaac Garrett, Kenneth James Gibson, William David Giebler Jr., Andrew Christopher Gillies Wright, Olive Lenora Gordon, Linda Susan Gordon Gorges, Anne Madeline Gorges, Loretta Ann Gorges, David J. Gould, Andrei Nikolai Gorvorgian, Nicola Jane Hall, Lorraine Frances Buser Halsh, Lynn Carol Hartunian, Anthony Lacey Hawkins, Dora Henrietta Henry, Maurice Peter Henry, Pamela Elaine Herbert, Rodney Peter Hilbert, Alfred Hill, Catherine Augusta Hollister, Josephine Lisa Hudson.
Melina Christina Hudson, Sophie Aylett Miriam Hudson, Karen Lee Hunt, Roger Elwood Hurst, Elizabeth Sophie Ivel, Khalid Nazar Jafar, Robert Van Houten Jeck, Paul Avron Jeffries, Rachel Jeffries, Kathleen Mary Jerem, Beth Ann Johnson, Mary Lincoln Johnson, Timothy Barron Johnson, Christopher Andrew Jones, Julianne Francis Kelly, J. Joseph Kingham, Gregory Kosmowski, Elke Etha Kuhn, Minas Christopher Kulikundis, Mary Brow Lancaster, Ronald Albert Lariviere, Maria Neves Laricochia, Robert Milton Leckbird, William Chase Lear, Wendy Ann Lincoln, Alexander Lowenstein.
Patricia Ann Klein, Lloyd David Ludlow, Maria Tercia Lukey, William John McAllister, Lilibeth Talibia McLaughlin, William Edward Mack, James Bruce McQuarrie, Douglas Eugene Malcote, Wendy Gay Forsyth Malcote, Elizabeth Lillian Merrick, Louise Anthony Marengo, Noel George Martin, Diane Marie McCloskey, Danielle Emmett McCarthy, Robert Eugene McCullum, Charles Dennis McKee, Bernard Joseph McLaughlin, Jane Suzanne Milkber, John Merrill, Suzanne Marie Mariaska, Joseph Kenneth Miller, Jewel Courtney Michelle, Jane Ann Morgan, Eva Andringborg Morrison, Helga Rochelle Morsi, Ingrid Elizabeth Svensson Mulroy, John Mulroy, Sean Kevin Mulroy.
Richard Paul Monetti, Mary Geraldine Murphy, Karen Elizabeth Noonan, Daniel Emmett O'Connor, Mary Denise O'Neill, Anne Lindsay Otenesek, Bryony Elise Owen, Gwyneth Yvonne Margaret Owen, Laura Abigail Owens, Martha Ives Owens, Robert Plack Owens, Sarah Rebecca Owens, Robert Italo Bagnuco, Christos Michael Papadopoulos, Peter Raymond Pierce, Michael C. Pescator, Sarah Susanna Buchanan Phillips, Frederick Sanford Phillips, James Andrew Campbell Pitt, David Platt, Walter Leonard Porter, Pamela Lynn Posen, William Pugh, Estrella Cristostomo Kiana, Rajesh Tarsis Priskel Ramses.
Anmol Rutan, Garima Rutan, Saruji Rutan, Anita Lynn Reeves, Mark Allen Rain, Jocelyn Reina, Diane Marie Rosenes, Louise Ann Rogers, Adina Roller, Jonas Gabor Roller, Susanna Roller, Hannah Maria Root, Saul Mark Rosen, Andrea Victoria Rosenthal, Daniel Peter Rosenthal, Maria Josephine Royal, Orna David Rubin, Elise Jean Cerasini, Scott Christopher Saunders, Teresa Elizabeth Jane Saunders, Johannes Otto Schwabel, Robert Thomas Schlageter, Thomas Britton Schultz, Sally Elizabeth Scott, Amy Elizabeth Shapiro, Radula Shastri, Joanne Shinshang.
Irving Stanley Segal, Martin Bernard Christopher Simpson, Irja Sinov Skabo, Cynthia Joan Smith, Ingrid Anita Smith, James Alvin Smith, Mary Edna Smith, John Somerville, Lindsay Ann Somerville, Paul Somerville, Rosalind Haney Later Somerville, Geraldine Ann Stevenson, Hannah Louise Stevenson, John Charles Stevenson, Rachel Stevenson, Charlotte Ann Stinnett, Michael Gary Stinnett, Stacy Leanne Stinnett, James Ralph Stowe, Elia G. Stratus, Anthony Selwyn Swan, Flora McDonald Margaret Swire, Mark Alex Tager, Hidekazu Tanaka, Andrew Alexander Teron, Arva Anthony Thomas, Jonathan Ryan Thomas, Lawanda Thomas.
John Patrick Flynn, Mark Lawrence Tobin, David William Trimmer Smith, Alexa Catherine Tessaris, Barry Joseph Valentino, Tomas Flora Van Tiehoven, Hassan A.J. Vijani, Militon Vermilerich, Nicholas Andreas Reynos, Peter Volku, Raymond Ronald Wagner, Janina Josepha Wadu, Thomas Edwin Walker, Keisha Whedon, Jerome Lee Weston, Jonathan White, Bonnie Lee Williams, Brittany Lee Williams, Eric John Williams, George Watterson Williams, Stephanie Lee Williams, Marion Luby Wolf, Chelsea Marie Woods, Deirdre Lynn Woods, Joe Nathan Woods, Joe Nathan Woods Jr., Mark James Swinenberg.